Hi there. You're listening to The Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. After another brief hiatus, I will be reading Chapter 8, The Fury of the Dragon, today. Let's get started. The idea of marriage in the Kingdom game never crossed my mind, yet in reality it was all too common in medieval Europe for nobles and royals to marry for advantage and alliance. It was only natural that we should copy history and use these childish marriages for our own benefit. If I could free Lady Sakura of her tormentor, perhaps she could help the Commandant and me. I knew she hated the Dragon Emperor, and with her on my side, she would be most helpful. Facing the Emperor himself was another problem. He had already told me to stop meddling and stop being so curious. He had lit me on fire for insubordination. This was something entirely different, however. If he wanted a strong kingdom to rule in the future, he would need to invest in his nobility today. The Duchess of Sunset was another girl I could have married, but it would have been below Madison to wed me. Besides, what advantage would that be, a duchess marrying a lowly lord? A rightful boy for her would be a prince, or perhaps the Dragon Emperor himself. Lady Sakura was really my only choice, since the aristocrats of Gaia were off limits. I came to the park at high noon the following day, and it was already hot. There was also a lot of activity, mainly at the cerebral center of the royal city. There were always lots and lots of kids there. They would be playing around, swinging, or moving through the metal jungle gym. I am sure my cousin would have been proud of how the capital was flourishing. As I walked along the asphalt, I ran into Lucille coming around the corner. "I was just going to look for you, my lord," she said happily. "I was going to wait at the bridge." "Any word from the chief administrator?" She nodded and filled me in. We were standing near the observatory and catching the eye of Lord Cameron. "After some deep consideration, Lord Isaac has agreed to your request," Lucille said. "I had my meeting. The Emperor would see me this afternoon in about an hour." Cameron came sliding down his long yellow slide and approached us with a smile. He was wearing that dastardly fleece robe again, and I could tell he had been sweating. The first thing I noticed was his new sporty haircut. It was certainly more aerodynamic than his usual shaggy above-the-eyes look. It had been cut razor-thin and spiked like a faux hawk. He looked quite handsome, actually. "Cool haircut," I smiled. "Thanks," he grinned. "Just got it done yesterday. What are you all up to?" "Lucille was just telling me some news," I remarked. "Sure is hot today. Aren't you a little warm in that robe?" "I take it off when I'm inside my observatory," he laughed. "Otherwise I have to wear it. Part of the uniform for my station." "Looks very fitting." Lucille was blushing. I laughed. I had to pry her away, lest Cameron would notice her blushing and eternal staring. "Let's go," I said, grabbing her arm playfully. "See you later, Cameron." When we arrived, Victor was on duty and Eva was jotting things down in her pink notebook. Victor was doing some sort of patrol where he marched back and forth across the bridge, looking stern and with purpose. He was wearing his usual Roman-inspired cuirass and carrying a plastic pike. "What are you writing?" I asked Eva. She was startled and didn't hear us approaching. "Oh, I was just writing some stuff for you to say to the Emperor. There's just some reasons for the marriage." "Thanks," I grinned. "Read them." Most of the reasons were the ones I had said yesterday, involving my concrete territory, my intent to expand and find an heir, Lady Sakura being the only girl in my rank, and so on. I nodded, giving Eva my approval. "Has anyone heard anything about the battle that is supposed to happen this weekend?" I asked. "I spoke with Garth on my way in, and he hasn't heard a word." Lucille answered. She was over near the water's border, admiring some wild roses that were growing. "They appear to be keeping things rather confidential. Perhaps you could ask Commandant Alexei when you go to the palace for your meeting." "I figured I would, yes, but I was just curious if any of you knew anything," I replied, placing my arms behind my back sharply. I stood like a butler, observing my minuscule territory. It was truly beautiful at this time of year. There were lush bushes growing near the water, including some pink wild roses, and the tree near the lamp-post was flourishing and healthy. Even the grass around the asphalt path was elegant and deeply rich green. The only place to sit was a random large rock, mostly for appearances. This was my own little throne, as I like to call it, but anyone could sit there. Eva was perched there now, continuing her little notes. "Must almost be time for the meeting," I mumbled impatiently. Lucille looked at her Hello Kitty watch. 15 more minutes, my lord." "This is nerve-wracking," I carried on, fidgeting. In truth, I was extremely nervous. The Emperor and I did not have a good relationship, and many of the Elite Four disdained me. Surely there was no harm in asking for Lady Sakura to be my in-game bride, but somewhere deep in my stomach I felt the feeling that the Exalted One would become furious. I suppose I wouldn't know until the deed was actually done. "Time to go," Eva remarked. We strolled along the asphalt path with purpose. Victor led my entourage and Lucille accompanied me. The commons moved aside and gave their ceremonial bows to befit my rank. I was still incredibly nervous. I could feel sweat dripping down my forehead. "You'll be fine," Lucille kept telling me as we approached the hill. She gave me a warm, reassuring smile. I surely hoped so. Victor unsheathed his sword ceremonially and led us up the hill. Like before, the area was littered with guards. Lord Cameron was there as well, chatting with Lord Tetsuo near the abandoned treehouse. We waited near them, exchanging small talk. A timid young lad approached me, likely no more than 7. "The Exalted One will see you now," he said, rather shyly and quietly. I nodded, and he led us through a small patch of trees to the throne room. The dragon throne sat empty. The same red-cloaked guards stood on either side of the chair, looking more like sculptures than boys. Each clutched a halberd in their hands. Tigress was pacing behind the throne, while Fox was kneeling in front of it. He appeared to be playing some dice game on the grass. They paid us no mind as we approached. "Good afternoon," I remarked, clearing my throat. From behind us, Commandant Alexei swept into the room, passing right by me. He was in his usual garb, black cape and all. The Elite Four were more inclined to pay attention to him than a lowly lord such as myself. "Lord Theo of Cloverleaf," the Commandant finally said, turning around. "How nice to see you. Do you have an appointment with His Majesty?" "Yes, I do," I said quietly. The timid herald boy came running past me from behind and stood near Fox. "The Emperor will be right here, my lord," he bowed gently. "You should all clear out and stop lingering," the Commandant said. "Shouldn't you be planning for the battle tomorrow? Or perhaps patrolling the island?" Tigress gave him a sharp look. "We only take orders from the Exalted One." Alexei did not falter, nor did he move. Instead, he let his hand hover over his scabbard. Fox rose and gripped at his own hilt. The tension in the air was rising. They were not backing down as the Commandant had hoped. "I am a far better swordsman than the lot of you combined," he snarled. "Now get out of here." "I should like to see that tested someday," Tigress hissed. She looked over at Fox. "Come now, Fox. Let's leave the Commandant with the little lord." I moved aside as the 2 samurai-clad warriors pressed past me, enduring their snarly glares. The Commandant placed both hands behind his back and breathed heavily through his robotic mask. "The Elite Four are out of control, Lord Theo," he said softly. "They were originally created and trained to exclusively protect the Exalted One, the Dragon Emperor. Now they have become overpowered and irrepressible. I receive complaints daily about how the kids are mistreated at the hands of these samurai." "Did you train them yourself, Commandant?" I asked, intrigued. "You mentioned you were an impressive swordsman." "Mantis is my only protege before the accident," he sighed. "The others were trained by the boy who trained me, who is no longer with us here in the meadow. The Emperor did away with him for defying his ultimate power." "How dreadful," I remarked. Alexei nodded. "I rose through the ranks, you see, to become head of the military. The others formed the Elite Four, and since then I have been having issues keeping them controlled. It is a strange dance we perform, the Elite Four and I. I am supposed to be head of the military, yet the Elite Four refuse to obey me. It is troubling. The Dragon Emperor would agree with me when I say that I am the meadow's best swordsman." "Why does the Dragon Emperor not step in and exert some royal control?" Victor asked. "The Exalted One pretends not to know what goes on with them," the Commandant replied. "Nor does he really care. He says the people need control anyway. They need to be pushed around. He allows them free range to do whatever they like. I disagree. This is, however, a chat for another time." Commandant Alexei sunk into a deep bow, and I knew that the Emperor was approaching. He came from behind me, but I was already kneeling. Lucille and Victor sunk down when I did, and just in time. The Emperor was preceded by servants and followed by a retinue of armed guards. They were all dressed in the samurai fashion, bearing swords and kabuto hats. The regal female servants, who floated like clouds, were dressed in silk kimono-looking robes. They moved aside gracefully. The Emperor swept past Alexei and took his seat on the throne. The entire welcome of the Exalted One was quite ceremonial. He was staring at me with his piercing blue eyes, and I knew I could rise. He looked like a central figure standing prominently in the front of his large cast of characters. They all had their judgmental eyes on me. It was quite a nerve-wracking experience. "Young Lord Theo of Cloverleaf," he said dully, "I certainly hope you are not here to bore me with your incessant curious questions." "Not at all, my liege," I said swiftly, moving closer to the throne. "I am sure you were well informed of my visit, yes?" "Yes, I have been," he remarked. "Yet you dare to think a young and petty lord such as yourself would be married before the Exalted One? Think not." "My apologies, your majesty," I sunk to my knees. Now, the commandant interjected. "Do not be so harsh on the boy." "Silence, you petty fool," the emperor hissed through his veil. "The only girl you hope to marry is none other than Lady Sakura. She is the only woman within your rank, and unless you should sour yourself with marrying a commoner. Or are you into boys? Is that it?" "I do not believe so, your majesty," I replied, standing. "Yes, it is true. Lady Sakura is my desired bride." My mind began to race with reasons. I could not pinpoint on one to say. "Lady Sakura is far beyond your rank, young Theo." I could feel the anger and the malice of the Emperor like red-hot coals on the bottom of my foot. I did not understand why he was so mad over such an unimportant marriage. "If you recall, Majesty, you pushed her aside," Alexei remarked coldly. "She should technically be free to choose whomever to marry, is that not so? She is a free woman and a member of the aristocracy. If Lord Cameron were to ask for her hand in marriage, wouldn't you allow it?" "Yes," he snarled, "because I like Lord Cameron. I do not like this imbecile lord." "I am not stupid," I felt my rage rise. "If Lady Sakura wishes to marry me, then let it be so." "I shall not," the Emperor fumed. "A royal marriage requires imperial consent, and that is consent that I do not bestow. You are forbidden from marrying her, Lord Theo." "How impossible is this?" I said loudly, and rather angrily. "I get that you hate me, Majesty, but have some compassion. I only wish to solidify my reign, to solidify my lordship. I need heirs." The Dragon Emperor remained silent for a moment. The clearing was quiet, save a light breeze and the rustle of leaves. His ensemble behind him were still as statues, silent and inhuman. They looked on with faces of discomfort. "Did you ever care to think that I do not want Walker heirs?" he said at last. "You are all menaces, disasters. Queen Isis was a fool. You shall not marry Lord Theo Walker. I should execute you now, for that is my wish." "Surely, your radiance, you do not wish such a thing," Commandant Alexei said, surprised. I could not fathom a reply, so I said nothing. I just stood there, staring off at the Emperor. The servants around us were now animated. They were as shocked as me. Victor was staring at the ground, and Lucille was at a loss for words. "What do you have against my family?" I finally asked, gripping my fists. "Silence, you courtiers!" The Emperor gestured rudely for calm amongst his chattering and gossiping menagerie. "Do not try me any longer, Theo," the Emperor growled. "Do not make me change my mind about removing your head. This meeting is adjourned." "No, it's not." My heart was leaping. "What do you have against my family?" "Get out," the Emperor commanded loudly. "All of you, get out!" He was speaking to his attendants and to his guards. They all darted away like frightened rabbits, deathly afraid of what the Emperor might do next. I stood still, unable to move. The Commandant stood near me, ready to face the infernal fire. The Dragon Emperor stared at me a little longer with malice and then removed his veil. Alexei's eyes grew wide. Such a thing had never happened before. The Dragon Emperor was a handsome young man, with thin lips and a Roman nose. He looked no more than 13. Peach fuzz rested above his lips. "There are many things you do not know, Lord Theo," he said. "I was once a powerful man, a duke. I ruled with an iron passion. I served my queen dutifully, but was hardly rewarded. Then, when Isis arrived, I defended my kingdom. As history has told us, I lost the fight and was reduced to rubble. When the dust settled, I was forced into a life of servitude, even though my blood was rich and royal. Yet now you stand before me, Lord Theo Walker. a lowly lord with a queen for a cousin. You stand before me, the Dragon Emperor, the exalted one, now who is high and mighty. This brings me great pleasure. When I heard you had arrived, I thought you were my undoing. There have been many prophecies describing the downfall of my kingship, but I chose to ignore them all. That is why you are not a prince, young Theo. You are a simple lord with a simple lordship, and pretty soon you shall lose your head." He paused for a moment, sighed deeply, and closed his eyes. "If you wish to live, I suggest you leave this throne room immediately." That was all the warning I needed. I turned sharply on my heel and was down the hill in seconds. Victor and Lucille followed me at a brisk pace, and before we knew it, we were in the royal city. "My goodness, what a horrible boy," Lucille said. I nodded. Queen Isis had been his undoing, and had forced him to be lower than dirt. Now that he was at the top, he loved to hate me. I stared at the ground, unable to think. What was my future going to look like? The Dragon Emperor wanted me dead. When we turned the path to return to Cloverleaf, Commandant Alexei was standing firmly in the middle of the path, surrounded by his white-cloaked guards. "You've come to take me to my death," I hollered, frightened. "I am not ready." Victor stood ahead of me, ready to fight. He drew his sword quickly. My heart was racing again. "No!" Alexei held up his black-gloved hand. "That is not it at all." "Then what is it?" I said, still scared. The Commandant motioned for Victor to sheath his blade, which he did calmly. Then he sighed deeply and closed his eyes, much like the Emperor had done. He then moved closer. "We must escalate our plan," he nearly whispered. His breath smelled of mint. "The Emperor wants you dead, which is no joke. You must go to Gaia, and you must speak with Oberon. I highly suggest you remain there, under their protection. You must abandon Cloverleaf." "But that will only escalate my death warrant," I growled, half afraid. "That will mean desertion, and then the Emperor will put a bounty on my head. I shall be tracked down by the Elite Four and slaughtered before the entire city." "Mantis has been dispatched to watch over you already. That was out of my control," he remarked sadly. "I had to stop you anyway. The Emperor has ordered your arrest." "What?" I nearly fainted. Now, I am like Sakura. I am trapped in an iron cage like the little bird I am. Commandant Alexei clenched his fists. "Yes, regrettably so. I suppose that was really bad advice telling you to flee. I am deeply sorry." "That's all right. You're just concerned about me," I replied. "How are we going to escalate our plans? What has anything even been planned as of yet?" "I will explain a little later, but right now Mantis is expecting you," he said. "Can I trust Mantis?" I asked. "You trained him, right? Is he like you?" "Mantis is the most sincere of the Elite Four, and he is also the most kind. But you must not mention anything to him at all. He does not know to the full extent what my plans are. I would not trust him right away, but perhaps later given time," Alexei said, walking back to his retinue. "He is a sworn blade of the Dragon Emperor, and takes his job literally. Now, come along. I know you will be able to trust him eventually. Mantis is a good lad." "He serves the dragon," I growled, beginning to walk with him. "I know, but I feel like he doesn't support him." I wanted to believe that. "Mantis has always been a piece of grass in the wind." He stopped and turned to me. "Swaying to one side or the other, he has a moral compass. Let's hope it points in the right direction." That concludes Chapter 8, The Fury of the Dragon. With a near-death warrant issued for poor Lord Theo, can he hope to remain unharmed? Join me next week when I read Chapter 9, A Lord Imprisoned. Thank you all for listening. I hope you are enjoying this fine May weather. Have a great week. Dragon Boats by Fass is the music used during this novel on the podcast. Find us online on Facebook and Instagram by searching @Everglade Chronicles. You can find all 3 of the Everglade Chronicles novels exclusively on Amazon. Thank you kindly for your support.